Welcome to HR.com Live. This podcast is produced by HR.com, the #1 destination to help 1.7 million HR executives maximize human potential and drive extraordinary business results.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Vickers. I'm the Chief Research Analyst at HR.com, and this is Data Time. And with me today is Christa Degnan Manning. She's the Director HCM Innovation at Ultimate Software. Christa's a research-driven thought leader who helps organizations and individuals understand and use the latest technologies to improve workplace productivity and performance. Frequently quoted by leading industry and trade media, Christa's presented on trends, leading practices, and technology challenges and benefits at the educational industry events and user conferences globally throughout her career. Before joining Ultimate, Christa led HCM technology and services research for a number of leading industry firms, including Aberdeen, AMR, Gartner, Burson by Deloitte, and as an independent analyst as well. So welcome, Christa.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we both share a little similar background in the analyst field, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation. You seem to have a strong interest on productivity, and I used to work for a firm called the Institute for Corporate Productivity, and clearly that was a focus of mine at the time. I was leading their research as well. So I think we probably have that in common. Talk to me a little bit about productivity issues in the world right now and how technology integrates with those productivity issues.
Sure. Well, I really like to say somewhat jokingly that I think the analyst community is to blame a little bit for the lack of productivity that we've had over the last decade. So I'm not an economist, but I do follow all the good work that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does in the United States. And basically, productivity is output divided by hours worked. And it's really been plateaued over the last decade. And my hypothesis is that we've had too much technology, too much disruption, particularly around when things move to the cloud. You certainly have ongoing innovation, but a lot of the first cloud applications, particularly in HR, were what people called best of breed. So you had one for learning, you had one for recruiting, you had one for contract labor, even travel and expense. A lot of the employee self-service was the first that went to the cloud. But when you put those all together in aggregate, it might have been great to have the best recruiting, the best learning, the best, you name it, point solution. But that's just added to this sense of overwhelmed, disruption throughout the day, the things that people are doing that are not really meaningful work. Mm-hmm. So to some extent, I think I don't think we would ever see this coming out of the government. But when you also look at some statistics that people are working beyond the average 40-hour work week, right? Like I think they're saying now on average knowledge workers are working upwards of 50 hours a week because you can be remote and virtual and on your phone and on your devices. If you actually divided that work, the output by hours worked, we'd actually have negative productivity over the last decade or so. And so I think really a lot of the research that I'm focused on, I'm really passionate about, is how do we get people to focus on the right work at the right time that really delivers value to their organizations. And then hopefully that would also give people back time for their personal interests and the things that are meaningful to them in their personal lives.
So what's really gone wrong? Is it just too many? You were talking about a lot of different disparate applications, and maybe they're all taking a chunk of time here and a chunk of time there. But what's really the sort of the basis of the problem right now, do you think?
Well, I think I felt it most acutely when I worked for a financial services industry firm for a brief time. I think few organizations really sat down and thought about what is the employee experience? How are people getting work done? And it really was brought home to me in that situation because this firm outsourced IT to one organization. They outsourced HR to another organization. That was another big sort of management consultancy thing to do to save money over a decade ago, often offshore or to a bunch of individuals that maybe weren't familiar with the company's culture or the norms of a company. And then you had all these disparate best-of-breed technologies. And so I think that the lack of really sitting down and saying, what is our employee experience? How are people getting work done? Are they getting the right work done? It sort of just went haywire in a lot of big companies, even small companies, right? Because you could go to the cloud and just for a credit card subscription, sign up to a new app. And that might be great to help some people get excited about having the latest tools, but it doesn't help all the other generations that might be in the workforce that have different comfort levels with technology. So I think probably about 5 years ago, I really started to hone in on what are organizations, not just HR technology strategies, because a lot of them really didn't have those, but what were the overall workforce technology and enablement strategies? And that's when I really started to discover that a lot of organizations really simply didn't have those plans in place.
So what do those look like? You go into a company and they say, look, our productivity stinks. It's pretty flatlined right now. We're kind of typical for, I think in the US, productivity growth has really been low pretty much since, toward the Great Recession. It's been strikingly low over the last decade or so. And I think that's not just in the US, I think that's across the board in many of the advanced economies. So you go into an organization and they say, our productivity is pretty flat right now. What can you do to help us? What would you say to them?
It's funny because the impetus really hasn't been directly on productivity because it is so hard to calculate really the contributions people are making today. A lot of people are revisiting performance management. How do we actually measure and manage what people are doing? I think what we've been seeing with the unemployment situation until recently being so tight, retention and turnover and engagement problems amongst the workforce was really begging the question, are we giving people what they want and need to be successful with our organizations so they will join and they will stay? Probably about a decade ago, there was a lot of discussion around the candidate experience, right? Do people have a good impression of when they come to look at our company, to look to get a job? Can we give them a sense of what it's like to work here? And there was a huge amount of effort going into employer branding and the value proposition of working at a company, right?
Yeah.
But then what happened was people would show up and the employee experience was terrible. You wouldn't get a computer for 60 days, like after you started. Like literally there were some hiccups that I've experienced in my own career where you couldn't be productive because literally the onboarding process of making people productive was just non-existent. So I think that's what made HR say we have to step up and do something and really have a better perspective. And there's been some good advancements around what people have done for the customer experience, the same types of approaches that you can use around, hey, what is it like to come shop at our website? They started to apply to, hey, what is it like to come apply for a job here? And then similarly, we've been able to take the same kind of concepts to say, okay, what is it like to be an employee here? And you can do things like persona mapping, all the things that we've really learned from sales and marketing about attracting and retaining and making loyal customers, we can apply to the workforce and the workplace.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is it's not so much fiddling with the technologies, it's integrating these various paradigms, engagement, performance management, improving these things, raising engagement, improving performance management, maybe making it more continuous, or maybe just somehow making it more effective in general. And through those means, we can have an effect on labor productivity or employee productivity. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of streamlining all of the employee experience, particularly with digital tools, so that they can do a lot of these things without having to actually do them. They are just captured in the course of doing work and getting stuff done. I like to say now the new thing is best of need, right? Give an employee the tools and the technology where they're at, on the mobile device, or using natural language to just talk and capture information that you want to provide as feedback or to include in a coaching session with one of your direct reports. That's really what the technology strategy organizations really need to focus in on now, I think is.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. What role do you think artificial intelligence is going to play in this? We hear a lot about that. Obviously, that's integrated with the technologies increasingly. What role is that going to play?
Yeah, so I've also done a lot of research into that as well, that topic, both AI in the HR function and then the impact of AI on the workforce, because certainly HR is going to have a huge role to play in leading organizations, in the right direction and skilling people to be able to interact with these technologies to augment the uniquely human things that they're doing and, amplify people's skills. And I think the really important things people should be aware of is, again, unemployment's been very low, but the workforce itself is actually shrinking. In 2018, for the first time, the World Bank noted that people over the age of 65 are now outnumbering people under the age of 5 in the developed world, right? So our labor force is shrinking. At the same time, it's been constrained in terms of, the economy had been doing so well. So AI is actually going to be essential, one, to take away a lot of the routine, boring, tedious tasks that people have been doing that have been making them less productive. At the same time, it can actually help augment what we want to do, innovate, problem solve, develop customer relationships that we're going to need, because we're not going to have as many workers in the workplace to do all the stuff. We want to continue to see economic growth and expansion.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. We've done a lot of research in AI over the last couple of years, and we do find HR people are not, generally speaking, super knowledgeable in this area. They've kind of come up the learning curve to some degree over the last couple of years, but there's still quite a bit of that curve to go. So what recommendations would you have to HR professionals to kind of start to understand AI's potential role, what it does better, what it does not as well, how it can complement people?
Sure. Well, I think I encourage, my family and friends, when they ask me what I do for work, or, what it is that I think is important about the future of work in the workplace, is to really try to imagine in your own consumer life, where are things being made easier for you, or more enjoyable, or making you more productive, right? And so we've come a huge way in the last couple of years with natural language processing. You can ask questions to your phone or your mobile device. Start to imagine, where can you apply these things in what you're doing in HR and for the workforce? Because I think people do have almost an expectation now that things can be accessible and be easier to do through voice or through their mobile device. And that's certainly available in the HR domain itself today.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. Now, right now, as we're speaking, we're sort of in the middle of a crisis around the coronavirus thing. What that means for a lot of people is they're working from home right now, as we're kind of doing more social distancing. How do you think the technology could play a helpful role? What are some of the potential challenges? What are the potential strengths of kind of working remotely in general, do you think?
Sure. Well, I've been a remote worker for over 10 years now. I have had the opportunity to travel quite a bit, so it's a nice balance. But I think absolutely doing things like FaceTime is super important. We can use things like video conferencing and the ability to connect virtually and change our behaviors a little bit more to take advantage of them when we have them available to us. I know for years, oftentimes I've been on teams that would turn off the camera, right? The culture was, we don't have to do that. You could stay in your pajamas, right? But I think we have to be more conscious to get this face-to-face time. We've done research that actually face-to-face time is one of the #1 things that people report that makes them feel connected and belonging in their organizations. That doesn't mean they have to be literally in the same room. It's being able to see your face and your facial expressions and really kind of seeing the environment that you're in, so I can be appreciative if you have children or dogs. My dog could start barking at any time if the UPS guy comes in front of the house. And so I do think, and this even goes back to research I had done over a decade ago, that's how you build trust between people. Face-to-face interactions, getting to know them as human beings and their life, right? And I think that's super important for people to focus on this time. And we have to consciously use the tools that are available to us to make sure that we have that literal connection when you may not have that physical connection.
That makes sense. And you mentioned the word belonging, and we recently wrapped up some research we've done with your organization, sponsoring it, global research on how to increase sense of belonging among employees. I was looking through the research this morning as we were thinking about the press release we're doing at this point. And I noticed that communication tends to be a problem with a lot of organizations. Leaders don't always tend to be the greatest storytellers in the world. A lot of companies feel like it's the face-to-face meetings where they have kind of helped them develop that sense of belonging. Right now, clearly, we can't do that for some of the reasons we're talking about, and doing some of the things that you're talking about can clearly help that. But do you have any other thoughts about keeping people involved with the organization right now as things are disparate, just from a management point of view? Is there any way to to help people stay involved and communicate better?
Absolutely. And it was funny because some of the research was surprising to me that like 1 in 3 employees said that they can't get simple answers from their organizations about what it's like to work there, their benefits, policies, programs, particularly in this situation, what is your company's policy on getting reimbursed for buying a new monitor, for example, right? So again, it goes back to my idea that this best of need. Can you give people access to the information in the best way that they want? Can you type in a question and ask HR via email or via chat or via whatever mechanism is most helpful for you? Like, can you still call into a call center? Is there a sort of a service delivery aspect of what HR can be doing to support workers in the way that we would support customers' preferences? Similarly, why don't you simply ask the workforce, open up a two-way communication or a dialogue, a way of listening more closely. There's been a lot of research done around the voice of the employee, just like we had voice of the customer, right? How can we start to collect information and use tools like natural language processing and artificial intelligence to be able to quickly categorize that and analyze that and synthesize that to give management talking points to be more proactive in addressing issues than sort of waiting for once a year to, ask if employees are engaged or if they have a best friend at work. I think a lot of our traditional processes in HR, the cloud automated them and brought them online. And we've gotten to a point where we actually have to fundamentally rethink all of them. But can we think about it from, an employee as a customer's perspective? Are we offering what they want and need? Are we listening and responding and communicating in the ways that they're most comfortable with?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Last thing I want to chat with you about, over the last 100 years or so, there have been various kind of dips and then peaks in terms of productivity. Very often when a new technology is introduced, like when electric motors and things like that were first introduced during the first part of the 20th century, productivity really didn't see any increases until we got to understand how to use the technology better. The same thing happened while we were doing personal computers the first time around. Before there was internet, there really wasn't much of an increase in productivity. And then companies finally figured out how to use computers to increase productivity. We saw kind of a big rise in productivity. Then there was the internet, a couple of different phases in the internet. We're currently more in the cloud phase now. And we seen this sort of leveling. Do you think we're going to see an increase coming up over the next decade or so? Do you think the history is going to play out the same way? We're finally able to really leverage these technologies well?
Yeah, I'm definitely optimistic. I think the last big productivity wave we had was around enterprise software. So simply getting things off of paper and into a digital realm where it could be more easily manipulated and exchanged. That was the last big wave. But again, I think as we move to the cloud and everything was pushed sort of the employees to do things, we didn't really think about the ramifications. It made the back office more productive, right? Because they got out of doing a lot of things. But then it was pushed on to the frontline workers. I do think as more people become comfortable with AI recommendations around what they should be doing next, I know even using an email application that now will suggest what your response might be, I'm a lot more comfortable a year in accepting those recommendations and knowing that my colleagues are not going to think I'm just, giving them a short answer that's not meaningful or relevant to what I really want to say to them. I think as we get more comfortable with the AI suggestions and recommendations and predictions, we as human beings still have to make sure we're making the right decisions. They will make us much more effective and efficient decision makers. And that is how we will spend our time doing the right things, the most meaningful things that will bring us back up this productivity wave.
Good. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I love talking with you. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? Any last thoughts?
And I do think that productivity, to my mind, is really the only thing that we've had in the history of the world, not just even the last century, that has helped increase people's wages. So wages, as people that might follow this, have been relatively flat over this last decade as well. Because productivity, it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. And the only thing that has actually improved the standard of living for humanity over the course of the history of the world is increases in wages, increases in compensation that then people can then turn around and spend in the economies and use to improve their lives. So this is a very fundamental issue that we have to really think about and address. And businesses really are in the position and must take the lead. But I think, as we've talked about today, there's some really common sense things that people can do, or HR can take the lead on, that will have a huge impact on the workforce, and then in exchange then on our world. So that's, to me, why I love to do this work and I love to talk about it. So it's been my pleasure to spend some time with you today, Mark.
Yeah, well, thank you. I hope we get to do it again. It's a really big topic, and I think we've only just started to hit the very tip of the iceberg. So
Indeed.
Thank you very much. And everybody watching, thank you for watching. And we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you for watching Data Time, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to HR.com Live. We have new episodes daily to help you maximize your potential. Be sure to check out our archives on HR.com and share it with your friends. Cheers.